Hello. Hello everyone. How is everyone today? Well, I'm going to get started. And since this workshop live stream is going to be available to rewatch later, if you do miss anything, you can always go back and watch it again. But yeah, hi, my name is Pypah, or Pypah Santos, and I am a freelance animator and illustrator, and I do a lot of work with watercolors. I do a lot of digital art, and I do a lot of 2D animation. What else is there about me? I'm currently living in Manchester, but I was born and raised in Porto, Portugal. Yeah, that's a little bit about me. I also have a YouTube channel where I post videos and stuff. And today I'm going to be doing a little workshop on watercolors and just kind of my sort of process about layering watercolors, how I do it, what I advise people to do if you are interested in that. So yeah, let me just show you a little bit of what I'm going to be using today. I hope everyone's doing well. Thank you for joining us today. Alrighty. So, as you can see, Artgecko sent me some very, very lovely things that I'm going to be using today. Actually, this sketchbook, which is so amazing. Look at it. I love it when sketchbooks have a good sound when you flip them. But basically, these right here are the Splashy Geckos, and all of Artgecko's stuff is made in Britain, in Yorkshire, and they're all made from sustainable sources, which we love. So this specific sketchbook, the Splashy sketchbook, is available in twin wire formats in both A4 and A3. So they've got two sizes. This one is the A4 size, and you can get them either landscape or portrait. Obviously, that depends on where the wiring is. Yeah, the cover is a lovely soft touch. I love soft touch matte finishes. I get those on my prints because they're just really satisfying. They're durable, they wipe clean, and yeah, I just love the touch of them. And yeah, so each one has 20 sheets of 300 GSM all media acid-free watercolor paper, cartridge paper, sorry. It's nice and thick, 300 GSM. Yeah, they're perfect for watercolors, inks, acrylics, paints, and marker pens, of course, Posca pens. And soon, actually, Artgecko is coming out with their Pro Gecko watercolor products, which are specifically made for watercolors and inks, and again both in A4 and A3 sizes, and those are coming out very, very soon. So definitely keep a lookout for those. I'm definitely very, very excited to try out those specific watercolor products. Yeah, so these are the Artgecko Splashy sketchbooks. I actually already took some paper from also this. It's the same sort of paper from the Splashy sketchbooks, but I took some paper from this stocky paper pack, and I took some of the 300 GSM white cartridge paper, which is the same paper that's in the sketchbook. But I wanted to show you that they also have this lovely range of papers, which I'm going to be using today. And I hope that the lighting isn't too bright for anyone. I hope everything is, vibing with you. And yeah, I guess we're just gonna start. I did the line art and the sketch for the painting and everything beforehand because I wanted the workshop to focus on how I actually use watercolors and how I layer everything. So, keeping it focused. I've already done this sketch yesterday in preparation, and today I'm going to be using these watercolors that I love. They're from Paul Rubens, and they're the 24 paint watercolor pan. I use these pretty much every time I paint with watercolors, they're my go-to palette. Just gonna grab these paintbrushes. And also in terms of paintbrushes, I've just got a random assortment of paintbrushes because I don't actually have a favorite brand of paintbrushes. I'm very lenient on that, so I just have a series of round and square paintbrushes here. Nothing too crazy. I honestly don't have much of a preference in that department. So I'm just gonna... Actually, I'm gonna keep all the paintbrushes here. And I'm gonna grab the sketchbook to put over here on the side because I always like having a little bit of paper on the side when I'm working with watercolors, so I can like test colors on the side and just, you know, do any testers on the side. It's always good to have some paper on the side, as well as some tissue paper or just anything you can like clean the brush on or dab. I always have some of that on hand. Of course, some water for the watercolors. I've got a white Posca pen that I like to use for details. This is the jumbo Posca pen, but I actually couldn't find my little one. But if you have a tiny Posca pen, that's obviously much better. But yes, my Posca pen. And of course, some masking fluid. This is the holy grail of masking fluids. It's got this lovely tip that we're going to be using today for getting those real details. And for anyone who doesn't know what masking fluid is, it's basically this liquid that you put on the drawing and it dries into like this rubber. So if you paint over it, it keeps that area underneath it clear. And then at the end, you can just rub it off and it's as if you never touched it with paint. It's obviously very handy when you're working with watercolors. So what I'm gonna do first is I'm gonna mask out, I need to shake it, I haven't used it in a while. I'm gonna mask out the this character that I've got here. There we go. It was just, I think it had a small clog because I haven't used it in a while. So I'm gonna go around the I'm sorry about my voice, it's been really weird today. So I'm gonna go around the character with the masking fluid because I'm gonna want to do some really cool overlays and gradients within this character to really show you guys what you can do with watercolors. And the same thing goes for inks as well if you are more of a colored ink person. But yeah, so this little layer of masking fluid on the outside is gonna make sure that we have some lovely crisp lines for our colors. And this is just a little silicone brush. I like to use this to fix any mistakes that I do with the masking fluid. And you can just get these at any craft store. Again, not picky about brands or anything for these. Any silicone brush will do. But I highly recommend you don't use a normal brush for these because then that brush is ruined forever because it dries like rubber. So it'll ruin the paintbrush. And I found that through the hard way of ruining God knows how many brushes. Oh, actually, I also forgot. Artgecko ran some questions today on their Instagram. And you guys sent in some lovely questions that the people at Artgecko were lovely and rounded up for me. So I'm going to be answering some of those during today's workshop. And while I do this, I'm going to answer the first one, which is, how do you draw faces for your pieces? Do you use reference images or just imagination? Which is a very lovely question, especially since I am doing a portrait piece today. I don't really have a preference. I do generally use references when I'm trying to practice specific facial features, or when I'm trying to get out of an art rut or an art block. I normally use reference pictures to just get myself, you know, feeling creative. But mostly when I'm doing my pieces, I normally go from my mind, from my imagination, I guess. But then again, most of the images in my imagination have probably been influenced by some sort of reference picture that I've seen already. So, but yeah, I love using reference pictures when I kind of don't know what to draw, but I know that I want to draw something, and I'm just kind of like, oh, I don't know what I'm gonna do. Especially for body. I know this question was specifically about faces, but for, you know, poses and human anatomy, reference pictures are always nice to use to make sure that you've got proportions right. But if you are like a beginner at drawing faces, I do recommend drawing a lot from reference and from life, because that's how you're going to ideally learn all the facial proportions and different facial proportions for different, you know, age groups, ethnicities, etc. So yeah, I do recommend. So now we let this masking fluid dry, and while that's drying, I'm actually going to get started on the face with the watercolors, since I don't want to be touching the masking fluid for a few minutes. And I'm gonna first of all wet my brush and mix up some colors. What I really like about this palette is that it has a lot of different shades, which is lovely. It saves me a lot of time in mixing colors, but it's also got like different hues for each color, which I love. So like it's got like more purpley blues and more reddy blues and more greenish blues, so I don't know, it saves me time in that department in mixing colors. But I do like mixing colors, so I guess it just depends on how much work you're wanting to do that day. Alright, so I've got this nice sort of dark beigey base color, and I always like going in with a lighter color for the the base first. So don't worry if it's not exactly the color that you want, because we're going to be adding on top of it. Just make sure that the base layer is streaky-less, so no streaks. That's what I meant to say. So make sure that the brush is wet, and keep touching the ends of where you stopped with your paintbrush, so that there isn't any streaks on where you stopped with your paintbrush, and make sure that it's all an even, nice, flat layer. And if you do go out of the lines, that's okay. You can just wet the brush, and while it's still wet, go over that area, and then using our tissue, you can just dab it off. Normally I'm not too fussed about going outside of the lines, because I'm probably going to make her scarf a little darker, so it'll cover that up. But yeah, so now I want to show you guys a little bit over here on the sketchpad what I mean about overlays. So depending on the mood of the painting or whatever I'm thinking of doing, you can overlay colors really nicely, or use them to mix. So in this case, the watercolor patch that I'd done before wasn't exactly fully dry. So by going over it with this purpley color, it mixes in with the patch that was already there, and then the water does the blending for you, which is really nice. But if I do like a patch here and then let it dry, later on I'm going to show you how you can layer watercolors, different color watercolors, to create what would look like an overlay layer if you're talking digital art, which I think is the best way that I can explain this. So you can also play with opacities with watercolors. So if you want to add like a different shade, like for her cheeks, for a blush, you can go in with a really washed out paintbrush like this and add the different colors here. And what I do for blending is then I dry my brush a little bit and I go over those edges and make sure that they are nice and blended out. This is obviously one of the many techniques that you can do for watercolors. There's so many techniques. There's the wet on wet, wet on dry, dry on dry. There's a lot of techniques that you can use. I like to do like the mid-term, which is like damp, the damp technique, I guess. And I go in a lot with my fingers as well sometimes on the edges, just to, you know, blend out the colors. But okay, now I'm going to add some color for her lips, and I'll basically take some of the reddish pinkish color and mix it in with the skin color that we already had, that I just turned into full pink now, but it's fine. And that will create basically like a reddish skin color, so it's not a crazy lip color. I wanted to keep everything a little bit natural and soft, to go with the theme. Oh, someone asked in the chat, how do you choose your colors? That's a good question. It really depends on what is on the page. So since I know I'm going to be doing different shades of greens for the leaves and the foliage that's around her in the background, I know I'm going to want to stick with like some purples and pinks for her headscarf and the tones inside her, because they're on opposite sides of the color spectrum, I think. I'm pretty sure. If it's green and yellow, purple's like on the opposite side. So I think so. If I'm wrong, I'm so sorry, but I just think that green and purple are like nice opposing colors, but they balance each other out. But I think I'm gonna go in with blues, like a more blue purple rather than a pink purple for this. But I don't really have that much of a strict regime, I guess, on how to pick colors. It's kind of like, what am I feeling? What do I think will suit the mood of the piece the best? And then obviously look at color wheels. I was like trying to put a little bit of color theory into what I do, even though I don't know a lot about it. I'm still learning myself, but it's always good because there's obviously some not rules, but you know, some rules there that help with composition and stuff like that. So now that our skin base is practically dry, and you can tell because there's not that little gleam that's picking up from the light, we're going to go in with the same skin color, but instead of having more water than paint on the brush, we're going to have more paint this time, so that it's a higher opacity. And this basically just means that you use up more color and you put more color on the page than from the first layer that we put down. There was a lot more water on the brush, so there's like a thinner layer of paint that went onto the page. The amount of water that you have on the brush determines how opaque the color is going to be, essentially. So then I'm just going to start adding in the shades in her face. And again, every time I want to blend something out that I feel is a little harsh lined, I'll just dry my paintbrush a little bit and then go in over it again. And you can just play around a little bit with the opacity. So if I know that my brush has a little bit of paint on it, I'll use that for lighter areas, so that I don't get like a super deep color on there, and it's like a safer bet. So I'm just adding a little bit under here on the nose. If you're unsure about watercolors, I definitely say to be cautious instead of going full of color on the paintbrush. Go light and add layers so that you don't end up with a big patch of a unwanted color that you then can't really fix on the page. So go in lightly and slowly build up the colors, especially if you're still getting acquainted with the, you know, how watercolors work and how the blending works. You can always add more water to the page and try to blend things out a bit more if you notice that something else on the page isn't drying as smoothly as you want it to. You can always add water and blend it out more. So yeah. Also, I'm sorry if the glare of the light is making it a little bit hard to see, but once it dries down, it'll be easier to see what I meant. But as you know, it is 8 o'clock here in the UK, which means it is dark. So I needed to bring out the big ones, the big lights. Someone also asked me how often do I practice watercolor portraits. Not as often as I'd like due to work, but whenever I have like a nice free weekend, I like to do a portrait, or whenever I sketch something that I want to turn into something more finished, I'll whack out the watercolors, but usually on weekends and definitely not as much as I would like. But there was a period where I was practicing a lot, so whenever I do paint some watercolor portraits now, I feel like it's just easier. It's not as much experimentation and trial and error. I can just get out my watercolors and paint, you know? So yeah, it's whenever I have time, essentially, is the answer. So while the skin is drying, I'm gonna get a smaller brush, and it's nice to like go back and forth. If something's drying, you can always go and add colors in somewhere else. So I'm gonna do her eyes with a little bit of green, and that's gonna like that's gonna match, I mean, the color of the leaves. It's gonna be a nice little marrying moment here. So just adding some green over here. Again, drying my brush so I can pick up a little bit of this water and pigments. I can, work with it. It's another nice thing you can do if you dry down your brush and then touch a patch that's really wet. It'll suck up the water and leave you with like a lighter shade, but only while it's wet. So you have to work fast if that's the case. Are those colors glittery? No, they're not. It's just that the reflection of the light is making them shimmer while they're still wet, but once they are dry, they're matte. When you use watercolors, how do you know when it's finished? Like when you have added enough layers? It really depends on you and your vision for your watercolor painting. I normally do it in stages, so I'll do the flat colors, and then I'll do shadings and highlights. Well, highlights with watercolors is just, leaving stuff in blank, I guess, essentially. But so I do shadings, and then I do different tones on the face, so like any rosiness or freckles and stuff like that. And then finally I'll start like adding shadings to darken up the darkest colors, and that's how I build up dark colors in watercolors. I just keep adding it to dry layers, and eventually when I realize that the contrast is nice enough, I'll stop. So once the darks are dark and they contrast the highlights enough, that's when I normally have a nice look at it, and I'm like, yeah, I think it might be done now. Again, if you're not like happy with something, you can always dab it away with some tissue and blend it out. So yeah. So now that this is all drying, I'm gonna head back to the lips and layer on some more color to add darker shades of this. So I want our lips to be a bit darker on the outsides. Basically everything that you want to be a highlight, you need to not add color to it, if that makes sense. Or you can just color it and then add lighting at the end with like a Posca pen or a white pen, but I prefer to have like a natural highlight and then add the really, really highlight whites with a Posca pen at the end. So yeah, it's good to have a nice idea of how the face anatomy works when you're working with watercolors, so you know where the highlights are and where the valleys of the face are, and that will help you with knowing where to put shadings, etc., etc. Okay, and while I wait for all of this to dry, I'm gonna start, what am I gonna start? I might start adding some flats to the scarf because our masking fluid is fully dry now, which means that we can paint the scarf area. And as I said, I'm going to be using like these sort of purpley colors, purple, blue. Actually, I would like it to be a little more blue. So yeah, like this nighttime sky blue color. And you want to make quite a lot if it's a large area, because you don't want to have to be mixing the same color halfway through, because then the color that you already put down is going to be dry and then there's going to be streaks. So keep the brush nice and wet so that you can blend the edges together to create a nice flat wash. And really careful over here so I don't blend it in with the skin. And yeah, just keep adding it. Whoa, I've got a splash. It's all good. Keep adding color, and also making the edges really wet will make sure that when you get around to matching the edges, it'll still be damp enough that you can blend them together. And that'll create a nice wash. Okay, so now just going over any edges with water to blend out those edges like that. And I'm going to go on to the next question that was asked, which was best art tips for beginners. I think the best tips that I can give is to practice, and definitely experiment with different materials, different styles, and definitely draw a lot from life, because that was what I was taught to do when I was learning to draw and stuff, was to draw a lot of stuff from life, you know, drawing people, objects, and just seeing how things work under different lightings, and just seeing how the objects work in the real world, so that then you can apply those techniques to whatever kind of art you want to create. So okay, I've added the flats for the blue, and now I need to wait for those to dry so I can add the overlay effect that I wanted to show you guys. And while that's drying, I'm gonna just add some touch-ups to the face. And for this, again, the darker I want the color to be, the more paint and less water I should have on the brush. So now I've got a lot of paint on the brush, very little water, so the color coming out is quite opaque, almost very gouache-y. So I'm just gonna do that real quick. For that, for here, and then I'm gonna color in this, the hair, and then I'm gonna just use some very dark brown and black to then add some details to her eyelashes and the face. I guess I could zoom you in for the face and just show a little bit what I'm doing at a closer detail. Yeah, I hope that's good. So yeah, with this dark black / dark brown, just gonna add a sort of eyeliner here with this brush, and then I'm gonna go in with a more detailed brush, this really itty bitty brush, and use that color to just create some eyelashes. And I'm basically just dragging out, and if it looks bad, I'm just gonna blend it out, and it's shadows now. But yeah, just making some eyelashes here, and I'm gonna add some darks over here on the nose. And I'm trying to do this quite fast because the workshop is only an hour long, so normally I would build up a lot more color and make it a lot darker, but for the purposes of the workshop, I'm going in with the details now. I'm going in with some deep dark colors. I'm gonna add some to her eyes here, and then I'm gonna just lighten that so I can add a bit of a gray wash over here to her eyes and make it look like a shadow. And add another layer of green to her eyes to really deepen that color. Okay, what's next? Next I'm gonna add just the final shadows to the face. So this will be my third layer, essentially, of color to her face. So I'm just adding the darkest shadows over here. So that's here. And wherever I need to blend, I just add more water to the brush, and then that blends in with whatever is around it, essentially. Next question from Instagram: how do you know when a painting is finished? Oh, okay. I already answered this question. What brush do you use for your outline / line art? For the line art that you saw before we started, I normally use a pencil, like a red pencil, if I'm going for like a sort of lineless or faded lineless look. But I will either use a fine liner for the outlines, or a nice brush pen or a nib pen. I really enjoy nib pens if I want to do some sort of like line art with inks, and like a little nib pen. I feel really fancy using it as well. It's just like you dip it into the ink and you feel like you're writing a poem or something in the 18th century. But yeah, I do really enjoy using those. Okay, I'm gonna bring it back to more zoomed out. Okay, that's good. And I'm going to now go into, is it dry enough? Okay, it's not super dry yet, so I'm gonna just wait for the shawl to fully dry, or the shawl, the headscarf, to fully dry. And while that's drying, I'm just going to keep adding the really dark colors over here. Someone asked in the chat, what made you study animation? I did a foundation year in art and design at university, so it's like a year that you take before deciding what course to do, so you can experiment all different sides of art and all different courses that are available. And during that year, I realized that animation was a career. I never thought of it as a career that I could pursue, and I've always loved animation and animated movies, obviously. So yeah, and I already loved to draw a lot, and then I was like, oh, so it's just drawing but a lot more? Sure, I can do that. So I tried doing it. It was super fun, and I just went ahead and did it. Okay. I think the shell should be pretty much dry now, and I can show you guys a little bit of what I mean with overlays. So I'm gonna get my big brush again, and I'm gonna grab a more pinky color, like this bright pink color. And over here where we did these, I can show you what I mean with overlays. So you'll see here that I basically went over this sort of pale purple with this pink, and where they touch, there's like this different color. We can do that with a different color that's more noticeable. Hold on. So if I went over that pale purple or this pink with a green, they overlay like that. And I normally do that with less paint, more water. But basically you can create different tones by overlaying colors. So that's what I'm going to be doing with her shawl, or headscarf. So I'm going to go in first in this corner and create a sort of, and this is cool to do like after you've added shadows as well. But you can add them in afterwards, of course. Or you can use this as shadows as well. It's up to you. You can play around with this. It's like words. The most fun part about watercolors is just how much you can play around with them and how many different things you can do with them. It's very fun, and there's a million different things you can do. And there's probably a million different things you can do with them that I don't even know about, that I'm still finding out every time I use watercolors. So gonna play around with that, and this is why I like having this like little tester pad on the side, so I can see what colors will look like on top of each other and see how they will interact. We can go in with like a light blue over here and do like a cute blue overlay on this area, and it will blend in with the purples, and this way you can create really easy gradients. It's like the easiest way to make cool gradients is while the paint is still wet, you go in and you make them touch, and then you have a beautiful gradient of colors. So now I'm gonna start, I'm just gonna add some little shadows here and there into her shawl and let the blending do the rest. If I had more time, I'd obviously be a lot more of a perfectionist over this. So this is actually quite good that I have a time limit. Otherwise, I'd probably be here for hours adding tiny little details. Yeah. As you can see, there's like a bunch of different tones in here. It's pretty fun. Got some more questions. Someone asked, what is your dream job or biggest dream / goal in life? Good question. I would love to work for like a movie company making like 2D films. I'd love to work for Cartoon Network, maybe. That's definitely a dream of mine, because I grew up watching Cartoon Network, so it's definitely something I'd love to end up doing. It'd be a very nice, you know, full circle moment. yeah. So now I'm gonna wait for this to dry, and yeah, we're kind of running a little bit out of time. In like 5 minutes, I'm gonna wrap it up, and then we can have like a little Q&A session right at the end. But yeah, so at the end here, you can go in with like, you know, pencils, like colored pencils to add like the deep blacks and colors and little tiny details that is hard to achieve with a paintbrush sometimes. So I mean, you could even go in with the watercolor with a really deep black and a really tiny paintbrush. You can always go in, add some tiny little details, but you have to make sure that the layer underneath is fully dry, otherwise it's going to start spreading out and you're going to end up with a black patch, and you don't want that. She's going to look like she has a black eye. So yeah, just adding some eyelashes and if it looks bad, you can always just wet it and pat it with your tissue and try again. So yeah, I'm gonna start just removing the masking fluid over here. As you can see, you can just like use a nail or an eraser. I heard works really well, but I feel like the eraser, I always get like tears and stuff. And I think that's quite, unfortunately, par for the course, getting some tears here and there. I think it depends on how much masking fluid you put on. I'm still experimenting with different amounts to see if that makes a difference, but yeah, I just have to gently remove the masking fluid. Unfortunately, I am really bad at removing masking fluid, and I always get tiny tears here and there. So gently trying to remove it, but also trying to be fast because time limit. So yeah, see, if you go just along here, seems to be working fine. It's also a really satisfying part of the piece. Of course, when, you know, when I'm doing this properly and I'm not ripping the paper, it's really satisfying to remove the masking fluid and reveal like really nice clean lines. So, there we go. I'm sorry, there's so much ripping. I normally wouldn't do this fast, but just for the purposes of today, we're going to let it slide. There we go. Okay, almost there. And here we are. So that's all the masking fluid gone. I know there's a bit of tearing, but I could just go over it with paint, which is lovely, and it fixes everything. See, it's like nothing ever even happened. Just like that. And I don't think I'm gonna have enough time to do the leaves over here that are in the background, but I think it doesn't look too bad, just like that. Yeah. we're going to be doing a little Q&A starting in a bit. So if you want to send in your questions, now would be a lovely time so that I can answer them in a sec. So okay, I think I'm gonna stop messing with it now, but yeah, hopefully this made sense in terms of the layering and overlaying colors, because that's normally how I do it. And then you can always go in with like a paint pen, add some really, you know, white details, and this always makes the piece really pop. I really love this bit. It's like my favorite part of painting, is adding these really white details. But usually I do it when I know everything's really dry underneath. But yeah. Some artists that inspire you. At the moment, I'm really inspired by Chris Hong Art on Instagram and Boat Fam. Really enjoy their use of color and stuff. So I've really been enjoying their work recently. What technique do you prefer, wet on wet or wet on dry? I definitely prefer wet on dry. I feel like wet on wet is it's really hard to get tiny details, and I'm very much of like a perfectionist, especially doing portraits and stuff like that. I prefer doing wet on dry because it allows me to do tiny little details, and I know that I have more control over where the paint is going. If you apply paint onto wet paint, it's going to start dispersing, and you don't really have much control over that. And I like to know where my paint is going. What pen did you use to sketch the lines? I actually used a pencil, just a red pencil that I had lying around. Wait, it's in my sketchbook. Yeah, it's really tiny, so it's in. I used this pencil from Faber-Castell. It's in like a little holder now because it's really small. But yeah, I just used that to do the drawing. And I like doing, I do this in my digital work as well. I like doing my line art in color because it, again, to do with overlaying, when I add color on top, you can always see sort of the red or the blue or whatever color I did for the line art underneath. And it's almost like it makes like colored line art without having to try. And I just really enjoy that look. So I've got time for some more questions. How did you start your YouTube channel? What inspired you? I started my YouTube channel like 6-7 years ago. I was posting a lot of my work on Instagram, and people used to ask me a lot like if I could do tutorials and how I did the drawings that I was posting. And so I created a YouTube channel mainly to do tutorials and, you know, just show my process of how I work. So yeah, it was mainly for that. And then I realized that I really enjoyed doing this whole YouTube video thing, so it just became another passion, I guess. And I find it really satisfying when I film myself doing a drawing and then watching it back in super speed. I just find it really satisfying watching it go so fast, because it's like you spend hours on a painting and then you watch it in like under 3 minutes. And I don't know, I just always found it really fascinating. Why watercolors? I just really love the look of watercolors. I don't think anything else can perfectly mimic watercolors because water is so unpredictable, and you can get really beautiful textures and patterns that you can't really get in digital or in any other medium. I just really like these, like when watercolor dries, you get these really beautiful patches, and I don't know, I just think it's really beautiful and unique. And you can just experiment a lot with it and do a million different things with the same medium, and I find that really, really nice when you can, you know, be using the same medium as the person next to you, but you can use it in a completely unique and different style and create something completely different while using the same mediums. It just gives you still a lot of freedom to do what you want, I guess. Have you tried gouache? I have tried gouache. I had a phase where I painted a lot with gouache like 3 years ago. I haven't done gouache in a while, so I might get back into it to, you know, freshen up a little bit. But I do really enjoy gouache. It's like a very nice medium that sits between watercolors and acrylics, and I really like watercolors and acrylics, so gouache is a very versatile medium, again, that you can use in a million different ways. Do you prefer traditional art or digital art? That's a great question. It really depends on my mood. Traditional art is a lot more like therapeutic to me, but digital art is a lot more convenient, so I can draw more easily and like just do mock-ups of things that I have in my head a lot faster, a lot easier. So it really does depend, but I guess for, you know, relaxing and for more, you know, long stretches of time, I like to do traditional art. Okay, advice to grow a following as an artist. I don't really know. I'd say stick to drawing stuff that you like, because that'll show in your work if you're doing something that you enjoy, or if you're doing something just because you want to gain a following. I feel like art in that way is very transparent, so people will know. Yeah, do it for yourself, essentially, because that's essentially why people do art. And I'd say be consistent, but that nowadays isn't really that true. I don't think you need to be posting consistently on a fixed schedule to gain a following. Unfortunately, that is how the algorithm works on many social media platforms. So if that's what you're sort of looking for, I'd say have like a backlog of pictures of your art so you can post consistently-ish, so the algorithm favors you. Fortunately, the algorithm sucks a little, so you have to work around it a little bit. But yeah, creating a sort of schedule for yourself. It also, you know, forces you to practice, which is good. If you say that you're going to post twice a week or 3 times a week, you got to have something ready to post for that day. So it actually forces you to practice and get up and draw. But yeah, I think that's my best advice. And I think we have time for a few more questions. I didn't really have much time to finish the background for this. I think I went a little bit crazy with the overlay for her headscarf, and then I just kind of ran out of time. But I can add some colors now while I wait for some questions. It was really lovely doing this sort of workshop. It's good to sometimes sort of try to explain what I'm doing, to rationalize it, because I feel like when I paint, I kind of log out and I don't really notice what I'm doing. But doing these sort of things is nice, because I get to actually rationalize my process and know what I'm, and trying to explain it to someone else. It's good. What We got some questions. Favorite colored pencils? I definitely really enjoy my Faber-Castell Polychromos. They're probably my favorites. And I've had them for years, and I still really, really enjoy them. They're very creamy, and yeah, they're just a really good set to have. How did you find your art style? Through trial and error, and it's still developing. It changes with, with me. If I get bored of my art style, I'll just, try something different. And it's sort of like seeing what sort of art you like and trying to incorporate different aspects of that into your art without copying, obviously, but, taking different elements, seeing what you like about it, and doing it in your own way. Sunflower arts that I've been painting along with you and really enjoyed it. Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you. Are you planning on making more watercolor related YouTube content? I love those. Yeah, I definitely do want to make more watercolor content. I feel like I haven't done much of those in the past because I haven't been painting with watercolors as much as I wanted to, but I'll make time from here on out because I definitely miss painting with watercolors, and I'll film it for everyone. And now I need to stop touching this. Okay, we're gonna wrap up soon. So if you have any more pressing questions, make sure to put them in the chat. Great watching you paint today. Thank you so much, the Corp Academy. How important is it to have a good quality paper to work with? Super important. 23. Razor. Very, very important. I have tried some watercolor papers that no matter what I did on them, it just, the watercolors just did not look good on them. There's some papers that I've tried that look ashy and it looks a bit like, and then there's some that are a bit like sandpaper. It's good to try out different kinds of watercolor paper. I actually really, really love this one because it doesn't have too much texture. So especially when I'm filming stuff like this, it's good that it doesn't catch so many different light sources that something with a lot of texture would. But 300 GSM, super thick, super nice. It doesn't warp the paper because it's really thick, and I love that. I hate it when watercolor paper warps. So if you're looking for really good watercolor paper to try out, definitely the watercolor paper that I tried on today, because it's really good for these overlay things. The paint dries nicely on it, so it means you can overlay colors really nicely. And yeah, it's nice and smooth. I enjoy it. I really enjoyed this paper from Artgecko. But having good paper, it's very important because that's the foundation of your artwork, where you're going to be putting all the mediums on. So it's good to get different papers, experiment different papers with different mediums, see how they interact together, because different combinations of materials will work differently. So always have a little tester. Any advice on how to avoid watercolor paper crumbling? Yeah, definitely the higher GSM you go, the less crumbling there will be. I know that there's some specific tape for watercolors that you can use to put around your piece that they're like water absorbent tape or something like that. And they keep watercolor paper from warping. I personally never tried them because it seems like some sort of sorcery that I'm scared to try. But if you want to have a Google, go ahead. But yeah, try taping down your paper all across the sides. It helps the paper stay still. And yeah, just give it, just try to use a little bit less water maybe if you're using a lower GSM paper. But yeah. Okay, I'm just going to answer one more question. Which sketchbook would you recommend for all purposes? Honestly, I have been using this Artgecko, the Splashy. Yes, Splashy. I don't know why that word sounded weird just now. Yeah, so the Splashy sketchbook, it works for all mediums, like watercolor, pencils, gouache, inks. It works really nicely with inks. I really recommend it. Again, little to no texture, so you can use, you know, mixed media and it'll all look great. So I definitely recommend this sketchbook. And the pads as well. The paper pads are really nice if you prefer to work on separate sheets. So that'll be it for today's workshop. Thank you so much for joining. Yeah, keep an eye out on the Artgecko social media accounts for the new pro watercolor sketchbooks that are coming out. I really can't wait to try them out myself. If they're better or as good as these ones, I can't wait. So yeah, thank you so much for joining. If you missed anything from the beginning, you can always go back and watch this later. Yeah, thank you, Artgecko, for having me. I hope you enjoyed or learned something. Have a lovely day, night, and bye.